All right, good morning, people. We are going to be talking about isosceles triangles. They have some really kind of cool properties that we can start creating some equations out of. So I want to make sure that we have a good understanding of what an isosceles triangle is first. There's some basic things that we can tell from an isosceles triangle. So isosceles triangles have two things here. We've got our two legs that are the same. Isosceles triangles always have two legs that are the same, or congruent, sorry. So two legs congruent. Okay, so two legs are congruent, but what that also means is that their opposite angles, okay, so the opposite angle of each leg are also congruent. Okay, so that is the case for all isosceles triangles. It really is the case for equilateral triangles. Like if you have an equilateral triangle, all the sides are equal, so all the opposite angles are equal. So we know that the two opposite angles are equal. So the angles are equal. Okay, so what that means for us is that if this leg is 5 and this leg is 5, okay, so if this is 5, then this has to be 5, right? And we say that angle A and B, if we say that angle A equals, that looks like about 70 degrees, okay? So if angle A is 70 degrees, then angle B also has to be 70 degrees. Okay, so they are congruent to each other. Sorry about that. You missed that whole thing, didn't you? So if we say that angle A is 70 degrees, okay, then angle B has to be 70 degrees. So there, again, it's really kind of everything about isosceles triangle, all that work that you're going to do has to do with the fact that either their two sides are equal and you're going to be making an equation out of that, or the two angles are equal and you're going to be making an equation out of that. Okay, so that's kind of the intuition, understanding of it, quick 2-minute explanation of it. So let's get into some problems. So what does that look like when you get into your worksheet? Because the worksheet actually has some weird lines on it that maybe you're not too sure about. So I'm going to zoom way in here and see if we can get you guys a little further in. I know these math problems get small when we try to cram a bunch of them on a piece of paper. Okay. So hold on. There we go, that's a little better. Okay, so here's our first problem. So it says, we know it's an isosceles triangle because we have two legs that are equal. Okay, so we got a leg here that's equal, a leg here that's equal, all right? And so their opposite angles are equal. So if this one is 72 degrees, then 72 degrees equals x. So x is 72 degrees. Done. Okay, so that's kind of the most basic one, right? So let's do another one, right? So we've got, this one isn't an isosceles triangle, but it is an equilateral triangle. Same principles apply. If they have an opposite leg that's equal, so this angle and this angle, so if this leg right here is equal to this leg or congruent to this leg, I should use the correct terminology, then this angle is also congruent to this angle. So if x is opposite of a leg that 60 is opposite of, then this is 60 degrees. Okay? All right. So, next one. We've got number 3 here. If we are dealing with this angle and this angle, okay? So we're looking for x. The difference on this problem is that x is not opposite of one of the angles, all right? So it's not opposite one of the angles, so it's not actually 50 degrees. This angle right here is 50, okay? So that angle is 50 degrees. Well, triangles always add up to 180 degrees, so we can say 50 plus 50, so 50 degrees plus 50 degrees, plus this other angle up here, x, equals 180 degrees. Okay. Well, if we know what 50 plus 50 is, that's 100. So 100 plus x equals 180. And what number plus 100 equals 180? Well, of course, that's 80. Okay, so x equals 80. Okay, 80 degrees. okay, which makes sense. 50 plus 50 is 100. 100 plus 80 is 180. All right. All right. Let's keep going. Let's do a couple more. These are kind of the easier versions of them. So this one's similar to that last one. Again, you're looking at opposite angles here. All right. So you're looking at opposite angles here, and we want to know what x is. So we know that this angle x is opposite of this leg, and so this angle opposite of this leg is also x. Well, how many x's are there? Well, there's 2 x's. So there's 2x plus 34 degrees equals, well, how many degrees are in a triangle? How many degrees do the angles add up to? Do the angles add up to? Well, they add up to, just like the last one, 180 degrees. That's really nice about triangles, is that triangles, their angles always add up to 180 degrees. Okay, so now you have an equation you can solve. So we can subtract 34 degrees from both sides. Okay, so we bring down our 2x. This is 0. And we have 6. Okay, so we're going to borrow there. 8, 4, 1. So 146. And then we can divide that by 2. So we have x equals 73 degrees. Okay, so here's what we did there. We know that there's 2 x's, right? And we know that this angle is 34. So we took 34 away from 180, and we're left with 146. But 146 has to be split up between these 2 angles, so that's why we're dividing by 2, so that we can get one of those angles. Okay, so and that's 73 degrees. All right, so now we're going to go on to some distances here. So the same going backwards, all right? So you have 2 angles that are congruent to each other. Okay. Well, then their sides, their opposite sides, also have to be congruent to each other. So we can go the other way. We know it's an isosceles triangle if the 2 angles are congruent, because their opposite legs will have to be congruent as well. So in this case, if we're looking for a distance, then x equals 9. Okay, so our next one. What's x going to equal there? Well, I know that I've got 2 angles that are congruent. Remember we talked about when we're looking at angles, if they have the same number of lines in them, then those angles are congruent to each other. Well, their opposite sides are also congruent. So if this is x and this is 11, and the sides are congruent to each other, then x, the distance, must be 11. Okay? So our last 2 here, we've got, again, same thing here. We've got 8 is opposite of an angle that's congruent to this angle. These 2 angles are congruent, so these 2 sides must be congruent, so x equals 8. And then our last one, we have, well, it's the same type of thing. We've got 2 angles that are congruent, so their opposite sides must be congruent. So x equals, what does it equal? You write it in there. What is it? It's up to you. You go. All right. So now, the problems are not always going to be this simple. This is the basic concepts here, right? We're talking about if we have 2 angles that are congruent, and then their opposite sides are going to be congruent as well. Okay, so this is like the basic intro problem. This is like the first easy softball question that they send to you on the test. So you've got to have that down. And if you don't, you need to be asking me questions again and giving you more examples. So, and these are really easy examples for me to make up in class. So if you have questions about it when we go over it, please, 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 ask me to give you some more. So now, what does it look like when the questions are a little bit more complicated? All right, so in this case, we have number 9 is measure of angle 2 equals x plus 57. Okay, so the measure of angle 2, so here's angle 2. So now we've named it a little bit differently, right? So they're saying that this is x plus 57. All right, well, we know that this is an isosceles triangle, so these 2 angles must also be the same. So 45 degrees equals the measure of angle 2. Well, what we can do is replace the measure of angle 2 with your equation there. Okay, so we have 45 degrees equals x plus 57. Okay, and so we're going to have to subtract 57 from both sides here. And we get negative 12 equals x. Okay, so I want you to take a second. I want you need to set up the problem on this one. Okay, so make sure you're setting up the problem for this one. Okay, set it up. And I will give you the answer of it. I want you to try to figure out how to set it up. And then if you get the right answer, you know you've got the setup correct. So your answer on this one should also be x equals negative 12. Okay, so you should get x equals negative 12 on this one. You need to set the problem up. I want to see your question here, or your equation here. You've got to set it up. Okay, and that's how the rest of these go. You're looking at two angles that are equal to each other, or you're looking at the 180-degree triangle, and you've got to be able to, in geometry, figure out which one you're going to do. Okay, which one you're gonna work with here. Okay, so next up we have our problem. So I'm going to do another one here. So we've got the measure of angle 2 equals 2x plus 13. So here's 2, right? Well, if this is isosceles, then we know that their angles are also congruent to each other. So the measure of angle 2 can be replaced. This can be replaced with 27. So we have 27 degrees equals 2x plus 13. And now we have our equation set up and we can solve for x. So subtract 13. Okay, and then we've got 4, 1, okay, and 2x, so divide by 2. And we've got x equals 7. Okay. All right. So I want you to work through the rest of these. These are, before you leave the computer, get these done. I'm going to come, I'll make sure you guys have your answers on these so that you aren't struggling too much on them, or you at least know that you're going in the right direction. And yeah, so okay, so next problem. So next up, we are going to move on to the back side, which is your notes on intersecting lines and what happens with those angles. Okay, so when you have intersecting lines, they create something that we call vertical angles. Okay, so vertical angles have a special property to each other when you're dealing with straight lines. So I'm going to back out here. We're going to go back to our whiteboard. Give you a little intuition on this one. All right, so we have two lines here. Okay, and I'm going to make this one perpendicular to each other. Okay, so, and we have two lines. Okay, two straight lines, and they're perpendicular to each other, which means that this is 90 degrees. Okay, so, but if this is 90 degrees, okay, then what is this one? What's this angle right here? Well, that also has to be 90 degrees. They're all 90 degrees, right? Okay, so they're all 90 degrees. So their opposite angles are going to be equal to each other. And so as we switch this up and we start changing our straight lines around, those angles are going to change equally. So let's change our angles up a little bit. Let's make something that's not 90 degrees. Okay, so we got two lines here. Really don't want them talking right now.
Please make your way over to Career Center. The appreciation breakfast is ready to be served. Again, all staff, make your way to Career Center. The appreciation breakfast will be served. Thank you.
Okay, glad we used that time for the announcement. Looks like I gotta go soon, so I'm gonna give you a couple more examples and I'm gonna send you on your way because I've gotta go too. Okay, so let's say that this angle is no longer 90 degrees. This angle is 100 degrees. Okay, so if this one's 100 degrees, then what must be the opposite angle here? Okay, well that one has to be 100 degrees as well. Okay, so if this is 100 degrees and this is 100 degrees and there's 180 degrees in a straight line, then this must be 80 degrees. Okay, well if this is x, what must x be then? X must equal 80 degrees, and that's the whole point, is that they're opposite angles of each other, when you're intersecting two straight lines, equal each other. They always equal each other. Okay, so let's go into your notes now. And we have some angles here, all right? So we know some properties about angles, okay? We know some properties about lines. Lines have 180 degrees in them. Their straight lines are 180 degrees. That's straight angle. Remember, we talked about that a couple days ago. And we have the measure of angle 2 is 45. So I want you guys to label it. Okay, so 45 degrees. So what other angle in here must be 45 degrees? Well, the other angle must be 4. So angle 4 is 45 degrees because it's opposite of it, right? So we've got 45 degrees. Okay, so if we know that this is 45 and we know that a straight line has 180, we can say a straight line has 180 degrees. And if we subtract 45 from it, we'll get the measure of angle 1. Okay, so we take our, if you need a calculator here, so we have 180 degrees minus 45, and we get an angle of 135 degrees. Well, if you know measure angle 1 is 135 degrees, then you know that measure angle 3 is 135 degrees. So again, that whole point of this basic problem is to show you that the opposite angles, those vertical angles, are congruent to each other. We call that vertical angles, okay? All right, so number 2. So if we know that measure of angle 3 is 83 degrees, okay, then we know measure angle 1 is 83 degrees because they're opposite of each other, okay? So it is your job to now subtract 183 or 180 degrees and subtract 83 degrees from it, okay? And what do you get? That's right, you get 97 degrees. Okay, so 180 minus 80 would be 100, and minus another 3 is 97 degrees. So that is going to be angle 4. Okay, so 97 degrees. So what does angle 2 have to be? I want you to place that in there. You need to put that in there. So you go. All right, so let's get into a couple of your homework problems that you're going to be given, because I think that once you get to that point and you understand that the opposite angles are congruent to each other, we can start getting into problems that are a little bit more complicated. Okay, so this one, we have our vertical angles here. And so just like you have other problem, the previous lesson, or the previous isosceles triangles, we started giving you equations. Well, now you need to actually solve and look for 2 steps, because I'm asking for 2 things. Not only am I asking for x, I want to know what x is, but I want to know what the measure of angle BOD is. I want to know what this is right here. Well, that one's actually pretty easy to answer in this case, because we know that this is 100, and we know that a straight line has how many degrees in it? Well, it has 180 degrees in it. So we know that that's 80. So we already know what BOD is. We know that it's 80. Okay, you won't always be able to do that, but most of the time you can. So like number 2, you could do that. You could find POS pretty easily just by subtracting 180 and 147. But finding x is a little different, right? So we know that these 2 angles are congruent to each other, so set them equal to each other, okay? And now you have a problem to solve. So subtract 50, and we've got 2x equals 50, and then 50 divided by 2, x equals 25. Okay, and it's not in degrees. Make sure you're labeling the things that are in degrees should be in degrees. The things that are not are not. Okay, x is not a degree, it's a number. And then BOD is an angle, so it should be in degrees. So make sure you're labeling that. Okay, your last example here is going to be number 2, and then that's a 20-minute lesson, so that's a pretty long lesson, so I don't want to go too much longer than that. So we're going to have, let's find out what x is. First, let's set up our equation. So opposite angles, the vertical angles are congruent to each other. So x plus 21 equals 147. And we're going to subtract 21 from that. Okay, that's just solving an equation, and we have 6, and we've got 2, and we've got 126. So x is 126, which makes sense. If this is 147, then we have x plus 1 plus 21. 126 plus 21 is 47. They should be equal to each other. So now you've got to find POS. So here's POS right here. And the way we're going to do that is 180 minus 147. So this angle plus this angle should equal 180. So if you subtract them, you get your leftover. So there's 3, and we've got 8 minus 5 is 3, and then so we've got 33 degrees. Okay, so if you have questions, we're going to talk about this more in class, and just to let you know, you are going to have a quiz today. So get ready for that. Best of luck.